This is a changeover of a Dillon RL550 from 9mm to 38 special. Remove the tool head. Install this tool head. We're going to remove the turret. Actually, I almost forgot there's a set screw underneath the turret. Also underneath the turret are some indexing detent balls, and you do not want to lose them. So there's what the set looks like for 9mm. And for 38 special, we have a different set. This you don't want to tighten down all the way. You tighten it, back it up about 1/4 of a turn. Now we may have to adjust that more later on. Okay, next thing I want to do is begin setting up the stations. So I've got an empty fired case, and I'm going to run it up into the sizing die, And make sure we knock the primer out, which it does. Now I'm going to reset the sizing die. And it looks like that one's set all the way. It runs down and touches the shell holder. So we're good. That sized the case and knocked the primer out. The next thing I'm going to do is set up the powder measure. So to do that, we're going to use HP38. I'm going to take a moment to look up the reloading data, but it says for a 158 grain cast lead semi-wad cutter, which is what we're going to be loading, this bullet, which has been powder coated, it reads to use 3.7 grains for 834 feet per second. So I'm going to verify that in my loading manual. Well, that was the correct load for HP38, but I found a different powder. The manual reads that Winchester 231, which I happen to have a full pound that is getting some age on it, can be loaded between 3.6 and 4.2 grains. So I'm going to probably choose a load of around 3.7 grains. I don't need, these are just target loads. I don't need a lot of velocity. So to compare that, I've loaded the same 158 grain bullet with bullseye. This reads between 3.3 and 3.6 grains, and I usually load 3 grains. And I can compare a second data source. So this reads with a 158 grain cast bullet, 3.5 grains will give me 826 feet per second, and that's about the same as what it's reading in this book, so I can believe that number. So let's go back to Winchester 231. So what I may do is load 3.6 grains. That is the minimum. It should be somewhere around 800 feet per second. It'll be a good target load. I may have to adjust this. I'm not going to really cinch it up tight. First thing I want to check is how much it bevels the mouth. There's a insert tool that bevels the mouth of the case, so I want to check that first. It feels like it's just barely touching the case. That means the tool needs to be lower. Oh, that feels pretty good. That'll work fine. So that allows us to seat the bullet or get it started for seating without it shaving off any material. And we may have to fine tune this later on. That's where we'll start. Okay, so off camera, I've adjusted the powder measure. This is the powder level currently. This knob clockwise is more weight, counterclockwise is less weight. So I want a charge weight of, for Winchester 231, 3.6 grains, which is the minimum on this. And I've got my scale set for 3.6. Very little powder. And I've weighed 3, and they're not varying any, so that is dead on for the grains that I want. Alright, the next thing I'm going to do is get, so we've checked the decapper, sizer, the mouth flaring, this detent, and the powder charge, all that's good. The next thing I'm going to do is set up the primers. And for the primers, they get put in a feeding tube, and I've got a little tool to do that with. The primers come in a tray, and I'm going to empty out one tray into the feeding tool. I'm using a Winchester WSP small pistol primer, standard pistol loads. And what you do is pick these primers up. You need to make sure they are firing pin side up before you pick them up in the tube. So you just do this 100 times. I'll turn the camera on when I get this filled up. So off camera, I filled up this powder tube. This now has 100 primers in it. This is a weight that keeps pressure on the primers. It also has a detent at the top so that as the primers are used up and it reaches this point, a buzzer will go off. So I've cleaned my brass offline. Good looking brass. So we're going to start with a case. I'm only going to use one until I get it through. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this charging lever off of the primer feeder, and I'm just going to dispense one primer manually. Every time the press goes up and down, I don't want it to dispense a primer, so I'll leave the charging lever off. I've got my one primer. Alright, so what that did is size the outside diameter of the case, and it installed a new primer. Next step is to flare the mouth and dispense powder, And even though we just checked one before, I'm going to check this one. That is maybe a hair under 3.6. It's very, very close. I'm going to keep an eye on that. I may have to add more powder. So the amount in a 38 special target load is almost nothing. It's less than the size of a cigarette ash. Now, since there's not a case here, it will not dispense powder. Next thing I'm going to do is set the bullet seating depth. The first thing I'm going to do is adjust this die so that I know it is barely touching the case mouth. So there, I believe it is barely touching. No, it wasn't touching. Now it's barely touching. So what that die will do is it will seat the bullet with this plunger, but it will also crimp in the bullet. I don't want to apply any crimp until I get the bullet depth about where I want it. So to do that, I reduce the depth on this and just barely touch the case. As you can see, it's just starting to seat the bullet, so I can apply more depth. Okay, so at this point I'm almost to full depth. Now I'm going to go down with the entire body and the stem, and it will begin to crimp. I don't want to put much crimp on, but I do want to straighten out the flare in the case. So to do that, I turn the entire body in. And it's starting to take the flare out of the case. Okay, that's about the depth that I wanted, but I'd like to have a little bit less flare, so I'm going to reduce the plunger and go down with the entire body clockwise. Still more flare needs to come out. Still more flare. So again, back up on the stem and go down with body and stem together. Maybe an eighth of a turn at a time. Okay, that's pretty close. I'm going to start with a new case and do that operation all over again. And get powder. Let me see a bullet. Go down a little bit more. I think I can take a little bit more flare out of the case. So we're going to do that. These are both shootable rounds, so I'm going to start with a fresh case. That looks like the perfect depth. I may reduce the depth of the bullet, but not the crimp. Okay, so now we have it all set up. I'm going to put my automatic primer feed in. I'm going to put this shell keeper in, and we're going to load 3. Now you'll notice on this one, I don't have to manually put the primer in. Now this one will dump powder and flare the case mouth. This is our third one. You want to see the bullet. That looks very good. Let's check our overall length. So this set of digital calipers that are on 0. I read this as 1.453 inches. I'm going to take my primer feed off and cycle these bullets out. This one should have powder in it, and it does. .451. .452, so they're very consistent. Let's make sure all of our lock rings are tight. So I read in my book the overall length for a 38 special maximum length overall 1.475. So that's a do not exceed limit, and again we're measuring 1.452, so we're laying 20 thousandths, 23 thousandths under the maximum length. So I'm going to watch this crimp, make sure it doesn't get excessive. That is a good depth because there's a groove there to roll the crimp into, and these look good. Alright, so now we are set up. So I'm going to load 2 or 3, and the last thing I'll be checking periodically is my weight of my powder. I want to make sure, since this is a bulk charge, that we have consistency in the powder. So I'm going to load maybe 6 or 8. And it may be a bit low, so I'm going to add a little bit of weight to get to 4.6 or 3.6 grains. Primer and no powder. One more powder check time. And that looks very good. Dead on the line. So that is complete setup. Changeover of a Dillon RL550 from 9mm to 38 special.